Joining us today, we have Greg Cole, Claims Director of Nisidawa Europe Limited. We've got Andrew Fairclough, the Global Head of Claims Operational Excellence at Zurich. We now have Richard Hiscox on the phone. He's the Motor and Casualty Claims Director at Aviva. And we've got Victoria Turner, the Commercial and Strategy Director at Hastings Direct. So I'll go around the room. We'll start with you, Victoria. If you want to just introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit about your role and responsibility.
Sure, thanks, Chris. So I'm Commercial Director for Accidental Damage in Hastings Direct. I've been with Hastings now just over a year. Been in the industry probably best part of 20 years now, with a number of different roles, starting life out with WNS as a claims outsourcer, transitioning across into LV as part of the transformation program with networks and engineering, and then a previous role to Hastings with Nationwide, the UK's largest body shop owned group. The kind of straightforward terms of what I do day to day, I'm responsible for the strategy that drives the customer journey in Hastings and looks after the commercial outcomes across the business in accidental damage.
Thank you. Andrew, let's go global. We'll head to you next.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Andrew Fairclough. I've been in the industry, this is my 34th year, always in claims. I started my career at Provincial Insurance, which then became part of the AXA Group. I had a couple of spells at Direct Line and Capture Insurance Services, and then I joined Zurich 17 years ago. Initially, I joined Zurich to head up their motor engineering unit in the UK. I left the UK business 11 years ago and started working at the regional layer for EMEA. And then 4 years ago, I joined the global group claims team. In terms of day-to-day activity, my role as global head of claims operational excellence covers a multitude of sins. But in the main, it's looking at all of our claims units across the globe in terms of setting framework, strategy, and making sure in terms of their operating models, they're heading in the right direction.
Well, you obviously left school age 10, or life has been very kind to you, Andrew. Thank you and welcome. Greg, let's go to you next. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm Greg Cole, UK Claims Director. We call it Andy for short and for ease. For those that don't know, Andy is the European subsidiary of MS&AD, top 10 global P&C insurer. Toyota are a major shareholder of MS&AD, so that means Andy are the preferred carrier for Toyota insurance in Europe and the UK. Andy also owns Insure the Box, the telematics insurer. And then most recently, a few months ago, we took on the renewal rights for what was MS Amlin's commercial fleet book. So as a claims director, some really interesting opportunities and challenges there, trying to deliver the best claims outcomes across very different markets and customers. I actually joined the business back in January of this year. So the first 5 or 6 months maybe haven't turned out quite as anticipated, but still thoroughly enjoyed it nonetheless. I spent most of my career in claims and supply chain at DLG and most recently eShore. I've also done a few procurement roles outside the industry in between there too.
Thank you, Greg. And Richard, I'll try not to always come to you last, being on the phone. How are you doing? And would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, no worries at all. You come to me whenever you like. And I've been with Aviva 32 years. So the absence of camera means you don't have to pretend that the years have been kind to me, because I can tell you they haven't. I started off with Commercial Union and obviously followed various mergers to the current situation. I run motor and kind of injury operations. So I run the motor damage, motor bodily injury and commercial liability teams, so that we can look at motor end to end, responsible for kind of indemnity and customer outcomes. So if it's motor or commercial liability, then it's me one way or another.
Fantastic. So just before we get started, just a reminder to the audience, please feel free to use the chat facility. But for my benefit, if you have any questions for our panel, if you want to pop them in the Q&A box, We'll do our best to either get to those questions throughout the course of the debate this afternoon, or between ILC and our panellists, we will sweep all the questions up and we'll come back to you after the event. So the theme of the conference is always future look. And when we planned to be on stage together earlier this year, during the last week of June, that very much would have been the topic. It's impossible for us to ignore recent events. So I'll turn to each of you in turn. Maybe we'll go with you first, Richard, just to maybe give us a few thoughts on how COVID-19's impacted your business specifically, your part of the operations, and let's start to think about impacts on the supply chains you look after as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think we've all faced the same challenges, haven't we, of managing our operations without having people in the office. And I guess what's been great is just how well our people have adapted to that across the industry. And some of the obstacles that we thought we'd have perhaps haven't been as difficult. So I think the obvious future kind of element really is that going back to the old world of having everybody in the building all the time just feels like that's unlikely to happen. So we're busy thinking about kind of the implications for that, but also trying to understand what opportunities that gives, and I think that's something that we can all do. And it's about reimagining, isn't it, what we use offices for? Because if we can get people to be operationally efficient and effective for customers and for cost at home, then you can use your office space much more imaginatively than just having rows and rows of desks of people working. So, I think that's probably where we're heading in terms of, what could we use our space for that actually makes people's working lives easier, and also thinking about the flexibility that this opportunity brings for our people. Some of the things that in the past have proven difficult, maybe splitting a shift so that people can work a bit earlier and a bit later to fit work in around their lives. All those things become much more doable if most of the work is done at home. So I think that's probably the biggest learning for me, is how much this can become normal, how much less we all have to travel, and hopefully address some of the work-life balance that we have. And then it's kind of, as you suggested, integrating that way of working into our suppliers. I mean, obviously, in my world, you can't fix people's cars at home, but an awful lot of the stuff that goes around that, the ancillary stuff, it's been much more durable than I think we ever thought it would be. Which then brings you a list of other things that might be more durable than we think they are currently. So we'll have to become a little bit more imaginative, I think.
It's definitely shown us all the art of the possible when it comes to making things happen more quickly, and long may that continue. Did you have people working at home at Aviva before COVID, Richard?
Lots of us in kind of unimportant, non-value add roles would have spent a lot of time both working at home and on trains and in cars. We didn't have a substantial number of operational people. We've been experimenting with it for a while, and for some people it's been a bit of a life changer. So we knew we could do it. I don't think we knew we could do it as effectively with all of the operation. We were selective in it in the past, so kind of going from nothing, almost nothing, to everybody in a couple of weeks was certainly interesting.
We have a couple of other seasoned workers from home on the panel, as you can see by Victoria's swanky home office and Andrew's minimalist global headquarters. Andrew, how has COVID impacted? I guess this could be a very big question in terms of your global role, but in terms of your area, your team, your operations, and the thing that you look after directly, what's been the biggest impact for you?
Look, we're an organisation of over 55,000 people globally. Wow. So, there has been impact. Of course there has. But I guess the big thing that's a standout for me has not only been the resilience of the teams to be able to adapt to a new working environment, but it's also the resilience and the robustness of our operating models that have been able to support that. I mean, Zurich have made it quite clear, you know, we've been open for business throughout. So I think that's been a real plus for us as an organisation. To move those 55,000 people to a working from home environment, as I say, not easy. A lot of credit has to go to our IT teams for doing that. But I think a big benefit for us, we were already sort of looking at the working from home, flex working environment for the last couple of years. So we'd already started to, from a claims perspective, we'd started to give our people the kit necessary to work from home. So we were already down that path. The UK organisation, they were doing flex working for the last 3 years. Right. So whilst it was new to some of the countries, a lot of them had already got plans in place. COVID just prompted us to accelerate some of that activity and see how resilient we could be at scale. From a claims perspective, you know, as I say, we've been open for business. We've been able to capture claims. We've been able to manage claims, validate claims, ultimately pay claims. In terms of the wider supply chain, I think COVID, without doubt, has highlighted you need a strong network. You need a strong network of suppliers that were also as resilient. And thankfully, from a Zurich perspective, across the globe, we've seen that in the main. Everybody has been able to do that as well. So yeah, there's been impact. Has there been huge disruption? Not as much as I think we would have anticipated or expected. Yeah. So yeah, a lot of credit to a lot of people involved.
I think we sometimes forget the pace that this hit us. You know, that sort of we were all starting to move the vulnerable home, but from the actual announcement to the fact that we had to get everybody home. When we look back, it's incredible how fast things happened.
Yeah, I think, again, because we have a strong presence in Asia Pacific, we were able to see firsthand what was happening in China and Hong Kong. Because we could see how things were growing, I think that allowed us then to make swift decisions. Once it started to take hold in Europe, we very quickly sort of closed down our Spanish operation, our Italian operation, the UK operation. And in turn, that allowed us then to see how it was developing across the globe in Latin America and North America. So having that strong presence in Asia Pacific for sure helped us in making those swift decisions going forward.
That makes sense. I'm looking forward to touching on how the trends you're seeing in those markets might help us plan for the future as well. Greg, for you getting everybody home, new acquisition, multiple locations, different systems and things, I'm guessing. How was that transition for you?
Yeah, the business here did an incredible job of really quickly getting people working from home safely. You know, great collaborative effort, and I think like many others, it was really new for customer-facing teams. So I guess it's not just IT, but you've got legal and compliance that supported really well to make it happen. And I think like a crisis to show what can be done. I think there's quite a few sticky plasters here and there to make it work, but I think if we can get the right infrastructure in place, it does prompt whole new thinking on ways of working. And it's, I guess, you know, can we harness that can-do attitude, you know, beyond this as well? I think the same on the supply chain as well. I think the supply chain held really strong. I think they did a brilliant job, and you've got outsourced providers that had to balance service delivery expectations, but you know, quite big impacts on their revenues, but I thought they got the balance really well, and they reacted really well when demand changed. I think on the repair network front, again, managed brilliantly in prioritizing key workers. Really good examples of collaboration with insurers, I think, with speeding up payments and putting cleaning fees, flexible mobility solutions, all those kind of good things. But no doubt a hugely challenging time for them as well, with that reduced demand, and also finding new ways of themselves operating under lockdown conditions too.
Absolutely. And Victoria, I know Hastings primarily over 2 huge locations, and I guess the London office as well. How was that whole move to home for the operational side of the business?
Sure. I guess, I mean, we were probably operating at around about 20 to 25% of people that were used to working from home. as standards. And actually, I think kind of one of the things that stands out kind of for me is that the speed at which we mobilised a solution, not just Hastings, but across the industry. Nobody would attempt a change project in the timescales that we implemented and moved to remote working to almost 95% of our business being out of the office. And I think kind of by the end of March, we were in a position where 95% of customer-facing representatives were working from home in a totally new environment. And more importantly, with the support mechanisms that sit around the outside of that to ensure that those people had the right communication, the right training, and the right supports kind of when they needed it. I think kind of a couple of the standout impacts for me are kind of how we all moved to an environment where we prioritized vulnerable customers or priority customers on reduced supply chains that had a number of challenges themselves. And I think the kind of partnerships that formed and developed throughout all of that with customers and supply chains working together with a mixed variety of demand with a reduced availability of capacity really stood out as to how we quickly used the software kind of that we've got in place and the people skills to ensure that the right things got to the right places and worked with some of the challenges that we had. So I think it kind of forced a number of things just to move quickly into a space that perhaps we would have been a little bit risk averse to previously. And actually we've all coped, Hastings and everybody in the wider industry particularly well with that, from what I've seen. Yeah,
and I think for me that coping is a key word. You know, we've all been staring at our screens, not always with 500 people on the other side of them, admittedly. But it's well over 3 months now, isn't it? And personally, you know, cabin fever, Zoom fatigue, those sorts of things. So I'm hugely focused on that employee well-being piece, and I don't think that that's anything that we can do without listening to others and learning from each other on. I think, you know, for me, a huge positive that came out of this transfer to the work from home was actually getting to know our people better than we ever knew them before by asking questions around, you know, just trying to figure out who had to get home, who wanted to get home. And then I'm sure those of you that have got operational teams, some that just really did not want to go until the very last moment. And it's quite interesting as we reverse back out of that. So, you know, Andrew, I'll turn to you as the first person on my screen. That whole employee well-being piece, you know, how are you guys tackling the way people are coping with this new way of working?
Yeah, I mean, look, as I said, to get 55,000 plus people, it's no easy task. Giving them the kit to do the job, I guess, is probably the easy part of it. Maybe our IT guys would disagree. But yeah, absolutely. You know, that mindset and, you know, working from home, I've been home working for 4 years. So for me, it was nothing out of the norm. But look, working from home is not for everybody. And as an organization, we acknowledge that from the top down. So very much we've set up campaigns to keep people engaged, make sure that people are, you know, both informal and formal type meetings. We've set up virtual coffee days. You know, Ian Thompson, I'm sure a lot of people know on this call, he's kept in regular touch with his team, you know, so it's at all levels, making sure that people are okay, making sure that people are well informed, they understand exactly what it is by the return to work principle. So yeah, Zurich's done a huge amount in making sure that, you know, we've engaged the people as much as we can with as much information as we think they need and more, you know.
Yeah.
There's so many routes and opportunities for people to reach out and ask for information.
Yeah, I think there's that huge difference between seeing people, talking to people in meetings, one after the other, and then just having that whole, hey, how you doing conversation without any structure. It's almost a rest is as good as a change. How's that been in Aviva, Richard? What have you guys been doing to sort of make sure everyone's doing okay?
It's been really quite interesting, actually. I think I've seen so much innovation from especially our frontline leaders, you know, the guys who've got teams, 12, 15 people at home. And we've been actually setting up forums for those guys to share the things that have worked to encourage people to learn from each other. I think we always try, don't we, to do the best we can, but actually learning from the things that work for other people is really good in a new situation. So I've seen my teams, obviously having virtual huddles. We use Teams a lot, not Zoom, as we both know now, Chris. So that's been really good. I've seen, virtual nights out, teams having, huddles with fancy dress and all sorts of other interesting things. We've had well-being leads in my team for a couple of years now. So leaders who are specialists in those kind of the whole kind of physical and mental health world. They played a really important part over the last 3 or 4 months, checking in with everybody as well as leaders, just making sure you spend time asking people how they are. And one of my reflections actually is, I've probably done far more town halls with my leaders and my frontline people than I ever did when I was in the office, because I was always, I thought, too busy. But actually, because you feel almost obliged to do it when you're virtual, it may well be I spent more time listening to people in the last 3 months face-to-face as new as you can than I ever did before, which is kind of shame on me, really, I think, and something that I've reflected on.
Great question to be asking our teams when we do get to see them face-to-face again, which is actually either as a leader or as a business, what did we do better? And I think that whole business update piece, definitely, if I kind of look at my historic way of doing things and the way we've been doing things since, I'd love to be able to, keep that going. I think we've done a much better job of that. What about you, Victoria?
I think kind of the things that we've tried to focus on during this time are new ways of getting to know people and understanding people's unique situations. I think you made that point a while ago, Chris. Kind of, it's really important and sometimes overlooked that we understand who people really are. And I think kind of there's more structure now in the touch base kind of points with people. I think previously, again, we're probably all guilty of if we think it's needed, we do these things. I think one of the things that's come about during this time is that we've structured the approach to them. So we check in automatically, whether we think it's good or bad. We're checking in to understand where people are at. And I think we've done a lot of work around looking for the signs that somebody's not, because it's rare that somebody puts their hand up and says, I'm struggling or I'm not coping with this. And actually there are some kind of key things to look for in the background to make sure that we're all looking out for each other, whether it's kind of, our peers, our colleagues, kind of our teams, outside of our teams. It's kind of finding that time to make sure that we're checking in with people, looking for the lookouts, and then making sure that the right support mechanisms are there directly, indirectly, internally, externally, that people can reach out to, so that there is a comfortable point to go to if somebody feels like they want to talk or they need support or they need help. And if they don't reach out, that you're sort of automatically there in the background, just prompting that thought process.
Yeah, no, I think that's critical. So Greg, last but by no means least on this, we actually ran an online charity day. So every quarter we'll do a charity day, and the team insisted on doing that on Friday, did a fabulous job. And one of the things, you can tell one of the consequences of COVID is people itching to get their hair cut. So, we'll always do the sort of sponsored head shave, and we've never had as many volunteers for a head shaving as we got last week. So I have to say,
why did you say?
Yeah, we're obviously okay, Greg, but I'll send you the video of Ollie Chambers' children shaving his head on Friday for a giggle. So what have you guys been doing at Insure the Box and Andy, as we'll now affectionately call the business?
Yeah, very, very similar themes. I think it's been a moment of truth, really, and as somebody new to the business, quite proud of how the business has really looked after its people. But in return, people have responded brilliantly in terms of really digging in when we needed them to, and like the other said, I think it's brought people closer together than ever before. So we've kind of been there, the business has been there for people in terms of financial guarantees, increased dependency leave, flexible working arrangements. Again, the panelists have said, this idea of connected communities, people able to stay in touch, people stepping up and, off their own back, doing quizzes and check-ins with people. Yeah, big focus on mental health awareness too. So I think actually, despite the challenges, there's been a lot of goodwill created through this on both sides, really. I think the challenge will now be the next moment of truth, which is getting people safely back into the office that we need to, which again is going to involve quite a lot of trust and probably some new skills, new management skills in terms of how we deal with that and the enforcing of social distancing and so on. But yeah, I think actually, despite the challenges, we're in a really good place.
And you touched on this when we were having a chat before we broadcast. How we start to unravel that now. We've been given, some direction. The reduction to a metre obviously helps us from an office perspective. How are you approaching that, Greg?
So we're opening our offices again next week, but it's purely optional. So a lot of good work's gone into making it socially distant. There's one-way systems, lots of hand washing stations, as you'd expect, and so on. But we've given guidance at the moment that it is purely optional for people that do want to return until the end of August, and by that point we'll see if things have changed. I think there will be a few people who are itching to come back and be in that office environment. But I think, take up will be relatively limited at first, but it'll give us some learnings in terms of how do we actually do this. And like I said before, I think we need to give our managers some support in terms of this will be another thing for them to bear in mind when they're managing people, and how do they enforce some of this and feedback and remind people of all these new ways of working and new rules to adhere to.
And are you still figuring out what the long-term operating structure will look like in terms of work from home, whether it be a permanent option?
Yeah. So as we said before, there's so much learnings from the last few months in terms of there's new ways of working, there's new thinking. We've set up a kind of cross-business working group to look at this. There's obvious benefits to consider in terms of if we can be more flexible in our working approach, whether that is working from home or the way that people work. That's only got to be a good thing from a talent and retention point of view. Can that actually enable people to give their best, bring more diversity into the workforce? I guess against that, we've got to balance the infrastructure. I think we've all probably learned more about our broadband provider than we ever thought before. We have got customer expectations to still manage and fulfill. There are certain roles and types of work that are better face-to-face, so we want to get the balance right. But I think the great thing, if we can take a silver lining from all of this, is there's definitely different ways of approaching work and doing it in smarter ways.
Thank you, Andrew. What about Zurich, and obviously maybe some thoughts on how you've approached that in other countries already, either because it's been safe to do so or through necessity? Any experiences you can share there?
Yeah, look, I mean, the well-being of the staff is paramount. So very much like Greg, Victoria and Richard have said, it's really down to each and every country to determine, what's right and what's the right timing to do it. Bizarrely, we have some countries where they want to get back to the office environment. Yeah. The working from home is not something that they maybe want to continue with, so they're desperate to get back. And those countries are doing everything they can to enable that. But equally as well, we've got a big operations in Latin America, and you see on the news there that the pandemic is only getting worse. Similarly, in North America, we've got some big operations there. So yeah, look, each and every country is wanting to do what it has to do. We will put the right steps and measures in place to ensure that the well-being of the staff is right, but also as well what's right for the business. Greg summed it up by it's finding that balance. and we will continue to do that. I think for sure, working from home or flex working, whatever you want to term it, it will drive opportunities to change the operating models. But it has to be right. It has to be right for the staff. It has to be right for the business. It's got to be right for the customers. And we'll continue to do that in each and every country.
Thank you. Victoria?
It's a similar theme, to be fair. I think kind of the key message that we put out at Hastings is that it's optional to come back into the office.
Right.
I think we've seen a real split.
So are you open now for people to return to work?
Yeah, we've started to bring people back in where it's absolutely critical that they come back in or they want to come back in. Nobody is being forced to come back into the business. I think we've found a functional way to operate outside of the business, and if that's a route that people want to kind of continue to explore, then we're more than happy that they stay away from the office at this point in time. And I think kind of that there is a constant reviewing of the situation to see how, I think Greg mentioned a moment ago, around bringing an opportunity with this that is giving us a chance to look at a more diverse workforce where we can keep some roles remotely. And that means that we can expand into areas perhaps where we haven't been able to attract talent previously into the business. So I think it's giving opportunity. It's certainly working with it step by step as the government relaxes the rules. And there's certainly no drive from a Hastings point of view to bring people in that aren't comfortable to come into the office or have concerns about coming into the office. But we are seeing quite a high demand from people to have a better working environment where they're not distracted as they are at home, or they're not challenged by, say, a number of people working in the same rooms, in the same space. So we really see a mixed approach to it. And of course, nobody's being pulled into the office at this point in time.
Mm. And we're learning every day. Question from the audience, which is a question that I've been asking in our business, and I think it does relate to that wellbeing piece, but I think it also relates to potential operational challenges. How have you been dealing, and I mean here at the sort of the coalface, the claims operations level, with holidays? Because I guess on the one hand, there's employee sentiment, which is not much point in me taking a holiday right now, versus that whole dynamic that all the holidays are stacked up and people do need to take a break. Admittedly, there isn't much or hasn't been much for them to be able to do with that time, but we all need a rest. How have you been tackling that, Victoria?
Again, we've tried to take a balanced approach to the fact that people don't want to utilise holiday at this point in time, but that we're conscious that people still need a break from the routine of working. So we've been flexible. We put some minimum limits in as to what we expect people to take for their well-being. Okay. And we've tried to manage around those. Now, if people have specific requirements where they've needed to take additional leave to look after their families during the time, then we've come up with new approaches whereby we can restructure things and be flexible about the kind of next 6 months to make sure that they've still got holiday that is needed as part of that. Yeah. So we're keeping in minimum requirements, trying to work with people's individual circumstances, and at the same time we're not forcing people to utilise their holiday. So there are other options to buy back holiday available to employees, which is also obviously offering a level of financial support where it's needed. So again, it's all a balance, and we're trying to work as much as we can with people's individual needs.
Anybody else on the panel that's got any other thoughts around the holiday piece or been tackling that differently? That's very similar to how we've had to approach it, and I think it's a common sense approach to that.
Yeah, we've been similar. I think where people have had pre-booked holidays, we've been encouraging them to keep them, unless by exception. One, to avoid that burnout, and also not just to get to a position then come the end of the year where we've got real operational challenges. And actually people have responded well to that, particularly as we've significantly increased dependency leave at this point as well. So I think we've got the balance right there.
Just a reminder to the audience, I'm delighted to take questions. If you could pop them in the Q&A box. Great question as well from Dawn Probert. How we've managed childcare and working hours. and that sort of customer peak demand. And then we'll move from there to talk about what actually is peak demand at the moment, because I think we've certainly seen some changes in patterns, and I'm keen to get your observations and experience there. I know for us, we've seen some incredibly bright lights when it comes to how productive people can be at home. And I think, I've really asked my team to look, and they've been doing it of their own accord, beyond the childcare piece, because I think it changes again, fingers crossed, in September. Because I know we've had some employees that are constrained hugely by being the primary carer, having the children at home, having to balance the homeschooling, and in the time that they are able to work, showing productivity far beyond they'd experienced in the office. Any sort of key things that you've been doing to help balance that dynamic? Richard, I'll turn to you.
Well, I think a few people have mentioned already, it's around having those individual conversations. I think whether people have got childcare or not, it's about, we've had certainly lots of conversations with people about what would help them. So you understand the nature of your demand, so from a customer point of view, what resource you need to pump in at one end, and actually across very large operations like we have at Aviva, then I think you have the flexibility to give people freedom. So we've, for example, had lots of people in the past who've worked kind of condensed hours, so maybe 4 days a week doing the full hours, and so they have a day off, so to reduce the amount of commuting time. Some of those people have been saying, actually, if I'm not having to commute, I'd rather work 5 shorter days, back to a more conventional. Other people who are saying, I'd like to do all my contracted hours, but I do have childcare. Can I work in the evening, or start in the morning, or do more at the weekend? And if you have that, then other people don't have to work at the weekend. So if you start by talking to everybody about, what would be fabulous for you, and then work back to see what your gaps are, rather than prescribing for people. I think we've had an awful lot of people have said it's been a real help, and they really enjoyed it. And we've actually asked everybody about the future, and it's a relatively small number who are saying they want to go and work permanently back in the office. The vast majority of people either want to carry on working at home all the time, or at least some of the time, which gives us huge flexibility going forward. So I would start, I think Victoria said, if you start off by talking to people to say, what would be the best working arrangements for you, and if you can give people that, then why wouldn't you?
Yeah, we've been similar, and I think that for me, that flexibility helps just manage the bounce back and the return to new normals, and we'll talk about where we're seeing volumes and claims frequencies in a second. But that goes back to that point as well about, we never asked our employees those sorts of things, and you actually get to understand them more as a human being, and I think that creates a stronger employee-employer relationship, and a better world for everybody. So let's do the volume question. Greg, new claims, where are you seeing it in terms of, let's call it pre-COVID volumes? And we've all got nuance in our business, whether it be seasonality, whether it be you've grown through acquisition, but on a like-for-like basis, where are we in terms of new claims volumes? And are you seeing anything interesting about the type of claims and when claims are occurring?
I think we followed the market trend pretty closely in terms of the COVID impact. So 30%, 35% of expected volumes. It's quite interesting, actually, using the telematics data, we can see that the claims haven't increased in line with mileage increase in the last few weeks. So actually last week it was looking like mileage was about 80% for our telematics book. Claims perhaps 55, 60%. I suppose the takeout there is very different driving activity. The time of day of our crash alerts and mileage is different, as you obviously expect. So there's less evening, nighttime, early morning driving. There's less commuting driving, more urban. We did think perhaps that as people got back on the road, there'd be a bit of rustiness. That doesn't seem to be coming through. I suppose, yeah, as lockdown starts to ease now, does driving behaviour start to change back to the old patterns? I suppose at the moment, as mileage has increased, our assumption is that people just are rushing around a bit less than they did before because there's less to rush around for, less to get home for quickly, and so on. So we're going to track that, really closely to see do the lines start getting closer together. Too soon to say, I think, at the moment.
Andrew, I'm smiling because a workman has literally started work right outside my office, so I'll apologise for any background noise. Not that he would know that it was Isle of Claims Motor Festival Week. Andrew, volumes, and you touched earlier on the sort of benefit you've got being a global organisation in terms of that getting ahead of the curve and closing operations down. What are you seeing in terms of claims volumes, and what learnings have you got from other geographies there?
Yeah, look, I don't want to dodge the question, but pretty much like Greg has said, I think it's just too early for us to determine, what are we seeing now, and what does that mean in terms of future trends? Yeah, look, for sure, we've seen a drop off in where we do motor, we've seen a drop off in motor claims, but equally where we write other lines of business such as travel, we've seen big increase. Equally as well, the different markets that we work in terms of what will those trends look like. You've got countries like Brazil and Mexico where motor insurance is not compulsory. So if the economic downturn happens as we anticipate, currently there's only 30-40% of vehicles on the road that are insured in those markets. So if money becomes tight, will people want to spend their money on something that they don't have to have and utilize, use that money elsewhere? So look, a bit like Greg, I think it's too early to say. We've all got these armchair experts that are telling us that everybody will now be working from home, so there's going to be fewer vehicles on the road. But that only works for a percentage of the population. For those people who do need to go to work, there's an alternative theory that says those people who used to get public transport won't get public transport anymore. And they'll use their vehicles. So there's a counter argument to say you might find even more vehicles on the road post the pandemic. So look, I just think it's too early, far too early to determine exactly what's going to happen here. I think it's just one we've got to watch as an industry and keep an eye on it.
And anything from any geographies that are arguably a bit further ahead than the UK?
So some of our operations in Europe came out of lockdown a little earlier. So places like Austria, Germany to a lesser extent. We're starting to see claims volumes rise again, particularly in the motor space, but not as, I think as Greg alluded to, that, everyone thought, well, everybody will have forgotten how to drive. Also as well, in countries like Australia that have very much come out of lockdown, Australia, Japan, South Korea. But again, we're not seeing now huge spikes to where we were in terms of pre-COVID volumes. But I think that's maybe, again, the element of some caution and people maybe who have the opportunity to get back to work. Maybe they are taking that working from home option, and we'll just wait and see. I think one thing for definite that may be impacted here would be, I think, the sharing economy that we were all talking about beforehand. People using e-scooters, e-bicycles, sharing of vehicles. I'm not too sure what impact there will be in that going forward. And again, does that mean then when it's not the sharing economy anymore, it's going to be back to individuals? Will we see more vehicles back on the road? I don't know. Time will tell.
I think for me, one of the things that I think cannot be avoided is that whole traffic volume being spread throughout the day more evenly, having an impact on the reduction in frequency. This work from home piece will help to remove, the rush hour peaks where I think so many incidents historically have been focused. And I'm sure you're all the same at the minute. We can see a correlation between good weather and claims frequency, which was always the other way around, wasn't it? But I think that's just that whole cabin fever. And when the weather's nice, I'm much more inclined to head out for a bit of a
But Chris, I think as well, you've also got to factor in here as well the severity issue. I mean, I think I was reading an article on the BBC that was saying that speeding in London was up by 71% during COVID. So, and
I saw that this morning, April on April, with the reduction in traffic, absolutely 71% up on prior year speeding convictions. Incredible.
So you might see a drop off in frequency, but I'm pretty sure that you're going to see in certain markets an increase in the severity for sure. Yeah. I think it was the Co-op as well who reported, was it a 50% increase in incidents involving bicycles?
Well,
so we might be seeing fewer motor claims per se, damage, bent metal, but we might be seeing other associated claims coming from it.
I hope, the propensity or the increase in bicycle purchases, over 1.2 million new bikes. I think bike usage on the roads is up over 400%. Again, probably weekends and weather, but let's hope that doesn't lead to any more severe incidents, as you say. A couple of questions from a colleague of yours, Andrew, which I will point at Victoria and Richard. So, you mentioned this earlier, Victoria, about prioritising vulnerable customers. So great question from Paul. What have your customers felt and said about the new normal? And what additional learnings from a customer journey perspective will you carry forward? For instance, will we carry on prioritising vulnerable customers? Because there are always vulnerable people, right? There've just been more of them that we've been made more acutely aware of recently.
Yeah, and I mean, the vulnerable customer journey is not something new to us. It's just something that's extended and been focused on a little bit more over the last couple of months. So I think kind of the customer view of what's happened in the last 2 to 3 months is that the customers are much more accepting of a delay to some of the services that they're receiving. They're much more accepting of a change to the standard customer journey through claims. But actually, they're much more demanding of being kept informed. So there's a lot more reassurance needed, a lot more kind of detail needed around the risk elements. So sanitization, if you're in a handover of a vehicle, or kind of, I suppose kind of, it's a balance. I think there is a demand for information, but there is a lot more understanding equally by our customers of the unique situations that we're finding ourselves in. And I don't think that's going to change going forwards. I think kind of the new norm, whatever that might be, is the one thing we do know is there's going to be a lot of variation to it. And the change will keep coming. And I think most customers equally have learnt to adapt and accept that there's not always a straightforward and standard route through. And they're a lot more accepting of that. And I think they will continue to be. But it's all about how we communicate and how we work together. And how we make real-time decisions with the information that's available to us. And I think a real key thing that we've focused on in the insurance industry for a long time now is customer communication and keeping the customer up to date with what's happening in the journey. We all know that as a proactive approach, that works really well and is supportive of high levels of customer satisfaction. I think that's ever more needed now. The customer is confused. We're all confused as to the variables that are out in the world now, as to what's happening, as to what we should focus on. And so I think we've learned a lot. We've learned to triage quickly with real-time information and to share that information. Mm-hmm. And sometimes just be really honest and frank and open with customers. We're sort of programmed to give a standard customer comms or a standard customer approach. And I think we've learned during this period that that's not necessarily what customers want from us. And so I think some of those things will stay with us positively as we develop out of this into the new norm.
Has anyone, thank you, I agree with that, and I'll touch on collaboration and also some of the complexity that comes with that, having been on the sort of supply side. Has anyone implemented any new technology during this period, either because you've had the time or the opportunity in the business to do so, or social distancing, new processes have kind of, made you take that leap of faith?
I think, Chris, in answer to it, and I'm probably not going to answer the question you're asking here, but as far as implementing new technology, we've implemented a new way of doing things, which may seem to some like a step backwards, because we've been able to process data and images in the accidental damage space more quickly, but we've added a layer of personal kind of inputs and expertise back into the mix because we've had the opportunity with frequencies being down, because the situations are unique. We've in fact reverted to the human touch approach to things and taking a level of expertise back into that. So perhaps in a counter response to your question, we have brought in new processes and we have used new different parts of the software that's available to us, but we perhaps used them in unexpected ways.
That's certainly been the case for us, because you kind of think, oh, all this time we've got now and volumes are low, it's time to put new things in place. But none of us have stopped for a minute. You know, that effort to get everyone working from home, check they're okay. Putting new things in has actually been quite difficult, but we've definitely seen a tilt towards using things like image capture, and also customers' propensity to use it increase. What about you, Andrew? Anything on the sort of global front technology-wise?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's very much the same as Victoria said. I mean, yeah, you've got the technology improvements, some of it, you know, state of the art, some of it not so, just utilization of things like MS Teams or Zoom to do different things.
Yeah.
But I'm very much like Victoria, which is, you know, one of the biggest areas that we've seen is you know, our staff taking the initiative, you know, and not being necessarily adopting or following the standard process. They've been looking at this situation to say what's the right result, the best outcome for the customer, as well as Zurich, and they've made those decisions. So we've seen in a lot of our countries, the teams step up, individuals, you know, feeling empowered to make those decisions to get the right results. Is that something we're going to see going forward? Absolutely, because why would you revert back? So I think very much like Victoria, it's not just innovation, isn't just the technology, it's about the people and the process as well.
Yeah. And the other thing you touched on there that resonated with me, Victoria, was the collaboration piece. And an example that came up on one of the webinars that we ran a couple of weeks ago in the body repair sector was, it's completely understandable that customers, whether they be vulnerable or not, are seeking some comfort clarification around sanitization, social distancing, cleanliness processes, particularly when it comes to their own motor vehicle. But if I'm a body shop, I typically work for 6-7 different insurers. And if each one of them comes at me with a different preferred approach to a clean car process, that drives complexity, cost, and risk of failure. I'll quickly whiz around the table. I'm just going to check the time. It has flown as we suspected. So as a sort of passing comment from each of you, maybe sort of 60 seconds each on what are your thoughts around collaboration and the opportunities we have? And maybe kind of one final message for the audience around, you know, if there's one thing that we could learn from this pandemic as an industry that would make it a better place for all of us going forward, what would it be? So I'll start with you on the phone, Richard, on this one.
I just quickly wanted to touch on the last question as I answer this one, because it kind of touches on collaboration. One of the things I think Victoria said was it's the way we use technology that is key. I think some of the ways that, for example, frontline leaders have kept in touch with their teams, so using the existing, you know, facilities, but in new and innovative ways, and learning that customers will adapt as well. So one of the things we worried about was, would customers mind other noises in the background? Well, the answer is they don't seem to mind. I think the point on working with repairers and collaboration, I think, is a key one. So across the supply chain, you know, we do have a responsibility where we work with partners, and several of us work with the same partner to make sure that wherever we can, we keep things simple. And it shouldn't just be in times of pandemic. You know, I think as the ultimate beneficiary is a customer, and we keep costs out of the industry. I think, you know, having sensible conversations to say, look, we need to do this thing, but you know, is there a way we can do it which doesn't make it harder for the people who are trying to give a great service on our behalf? I think that would be a good place to start.
Yeah, agreed. Victoria?
I think kind of The one thing that we need to be conscious of is the fact that we send different demands into a supply chain that are very difficult to manage and incur cost and confusion comes as part of that. And I think collaboration is difficult in a competitive environment, and we need to probably also be very aware of the difficulties of agreeing approaches across the industry, but absolutely in certain areas where we can refer back to government advice, we should all be aligned. And there should be one standard. There is no way in the supply chain that you could or should be expected to deliver different levels of service around critical hygiene factors or sanitization kind of routines. It just shouldn't happen. But it's a very challenging environment to make sure that we all agree on what our expectations are. And I think almost dangerous to have unique expectations, insurer by insurer or work provider by work provider. So I think we need to work together, but there needs to be better forums than there are currently to facilitate that. I don't think we've necessarily got the right forums to enable those at the moment. So we've got to find better routes to those solutions.
And we don't have a great track record either of doing that. Greg, what moments of great collaboration have you seen, and would you like to think can bring the industry closer together?
Well, I think it's certainly reminded us of how important it is to work with suppliers where appropriate as partners in terms of shared values, shared value creation. Just make sure we don't have a kind of blunt procurement tool of just focused on margins. I think from a slightly different perspective, speaking to a lot of suppliers recently, many have said how ruthless they've had to be with process efficiencies and eliminating waste during the last few months. I think it's just made it clearer than ever before some of the duplication and inefficiencies that still exist between insurers and their supply chain. I think it'll just accelerate steps that insurers are already looking at, being on the same digital platforms or ecosystems, whatever you want to call it, with their supply chain. Because as Victoria is saying, it's just a much better customer journey in terms of keeping them informed and managing expectations.
Yeah. And Andrew, our final word from the panel before we say thank you to everybody.
Yeah, look, a lot of people on this call may not see it this way, but trust me, what you guys have in the UK, I wish I could bottle it and export it, because where you don't have those relationships, and with any relationship, yeah, there's some good times and there's some bad times, and sometimes you don't see eye to eye. But where those relationships do not exist, it becomes even more difficult and becomes even more adversarial. So if there's anything that for me COVID has taught, is we need each other, and having strong relationships with strong networks can all ultimately lead to your customers, and that's mainly what it's all about. So if there's anything I take away from this, I would encourage everybody, to Vicky's point, if you can get forums to make those relations even stronger and better for everybody, I would encourage you to do so.
That's great words, and what a fantastic way to finish this first panel debate. We've overrun slightly, but nobody's got anything to do this afternoon other than join our next session at 3 o'clock. Before we have some fun this evening with Mr. Kamara at 7:30. It's not too late to register for those events. We've got 3 or 4 questions left in the Q&A box from Miles at Innovation Group, from Chris Brown. He's only been in his job about a week and he's already asking questions, and an anonymous attendee who wants to know if we've seen more vehicle thefts during this period. So I'll work with you all to try and create some answers to those questions. Thank you so much for affording the time you've given us and your support for ILC. We in the audience appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you all soon when it's safe to do so. Thanks to our audience. We will see you at 3 o'clock and throughout the course of the week. Really appreciate it, everyone. Well done. Thank you.